The summer I turned 50, I drove 3 hours to sit under a tree. Not just any tree, the one my grandfather planted the morning I was born. And when I finally sat down against that trunk, 50 years of bark and silence and waiting. The first thing I felt wasn't peace, it was shame. Because it took me that long to do the one thing he ever asked of me. He never once sat under it himself. I asked him once, when I was maybe 7, why he didn't. He looked at the tree for a long moment. Still small then, barely taller than me. And he said, "That's not what it's for." I didn't ask again. I was 7. I didn't know what questions to ask yet. My grandfather was 45 years old the morning I came home from the hospital. While my mother rested and my father made phone calls, he went into the backyard alone. I have exactly one photograph of this. And planted a bare root oak sapling in the corner of the yard, tied to a wooden stake with a strip of old cloth. In the photograph, he is not smiling, he is looking at the tree. And there is something in his face that I used to read as sadness. Now I know it wasn't sadness at all. It was knowing. He told my father one thing that morning. My father repeated it to me every year until the day he couldn't anymore. 7 words. When she feels lost, go sit under it. That was the whole instruction. No explanation, no manual. 7 words and a tree that had not yet grown tall enough to give shade to anyone. Here is the thing about trees. And about grandfathers. Wisdom that arrives before you can receive it doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just grows, quietly. 1. Today I want to tell you what I found when I finally sat under that tree at 50. The 3 things my grandfather encoded in that one act of planting. Stay with me. Because if someone planted something for you, and you haven't gone back yet, this might be the story that changes that. My grandfather was the kind of man who believed everything worth having takes longer than you think. He grew up watching his own father plant fruit trees that didn't bear fruit for 7 years. He never complained. He thought it was the point. He spent his life doing things whose payoff he would never see, and he seemed, this is what I remember most clearly, entirely at peace with that. He was not a complicated man. He didn't talk much. When he had something to say, he said it once, simply, and went back to whatever he was doing. Which drove me absolutely crazy when I was 16 and needed answers. But I understand now. The less he said, the more carefully he chose what to say. So when he planted that tree and left behind exactly 7 words, I should have understood from the start that those 7 words were everything. He died 2 months before my 39th birthday. The oak tree by then was 38 years old, taller than the house. I drove past it on the way to his funeral. I did not stop. For 12 years after that, I drove past regularly and never once pulled over. I'd see it from the road. Sometimes I'd slow down, but I always kept going. It wasn't busyness. It was fear. The quiet kind. The kind that knows if you sit still long enough, something real will surface. And then I turned 50. Something in me finally said, enough. Enough driving past. Enough waiting for the right time. Because the right time is not a condition. It is a decision. I knocked on the door. A young family lives there now. I explained that my grandfather had planted the oak the day I was born and left me instructions to sit under it when I felt lost. And that I admitted, somewhat lost. The woman who answered didn't hesitate. Of course. Take as long as you need. Law. And awe. The tree was magnificent. That is the only word. 50 years in one spot, unmoved. The trunk was wider than my arms could reach. The roots had lifted and cracked the old paving stones in every direction, which they had earned. I sat down against the trunk, Back to the bark, the way you sit against something you trust. For a long time, I didn't think anything at all. I have spent most of my adult life thinking, analyzing, worrying. But under that tree, for the first time in years, the noise inside me went quiet. And then, I don't know how long I'd been sitting there. Something cracked open, not dramatically, quietly, the way a seed cracks underground, where nobody sees it, right before everything begins. I realized that my grandfather did not plant that tree to give me shade. He planted it to give me a place to return to. A place older than my confusion, older than my regrets, older than whatever I was running from. A thing that had been quietly deepening its roots the entire time I was out there getting lost. And then I understood why he looked sad in that photograph. He wasn't sad because he was planting a tree. He was sad because he already knew. With a clarity that only certain people possess late in their lives, that he would never sit here. That this moment, exactly this moment, would happen after he was gone. He was grieving a moment he would never see, and he planted the tree anyway. There is an old saying, traced back through centuries, that a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. My grandfather never quoted it to me, but he had lived it. And what he left encoded inside that act were three things I believe we have mostly stopped teaching, stopped passing on. The first thing, roots before growth. A young oak spends most of its early life underground. You cannot see it working. Nothing appears to be happening. And then, years into that invisible labor, the trunk appears, already solid. My grandfather understood that the years when I couldn't see my own progress were not wasted years. They were root years. Root years are the most important years of all. If you are in them right now, don't mistake invisibility for failure. The second thing, the tree does not chase the light. It grows toward it. There is a difference. Chasing the light means running toward whatever is bright, whatever promises to fix the feeling of being lost. Growing toward the light means staying rooted. Slowly, patiently orienting yourself toward what is true, until one day you are tall enough to touch it. My grandfather never once chased anything in his life. He grew toward everything. The third thing is the hardest and the most important. My grandfather did not plant that tree for himself. He planted it for the person who would need it after he was gone. He knew. He must have known that he would be the one doing the planting, and someone else would be the one receiving the shade. And he did it anyway, without resentment, without any expectation of being thanked. That is not sacrifice. 1. That is love with a 50-year time horizon. I want to ask you something. What are you planting right now that you will never sit in the shade of? What are you building, or teaching, or modeling, knowing the benefit goes to someone who comes after you? Because that is the question my grandfather was asking me 50 years before I was ready to hear it. Researchers who study midlife describe this moment as an awakening, a reassessment of what truly matters. There is nothing wrong with you if you are feeling it. It is the tree finishing its root work and finally beginning to grow above the ground. I drove home with the windows down. Something I never do. I thought about my grandfather not with grief, but with gratitude. He had not left me an inheritance. He had not left me advice. He had left me a tree. And a tree, it turns out, is more than enough. That evening, I bought a bare-root white oak sapling and planted it in the corner of my yard. Same corner, same orientation. tied to a wooden stake with a strip of cloth. For the grandchild, I don't have yet. My grandfather was 45 when he planted his. I was 50 when I planted mine. He never sat under his. I may never sit under mine. But that, as he tried to tell me my entire childhood in the clearest language he knew, is not the point. The point is the planting. The point is the faith in the one who comes after. The point was me, sitting under it at 50, feeling him in the bark and the roots and the quiet. The point was that love, real love, patient love, plants things it will never harvest, for people it will always believe in. So here is what I want to ask of you today. Not someday, today. Think of one person in your life, living or not, who planted something for you, a habit they modeled, a belief they handed you quietly, a way of showing up in the world that you carry without knowing you carry it. If they're still here, tell them. If they can't hear you anymore, plant something in return, because the heaviest things we carry are not the ones people gave us. They are the ones we never gave to anyone. If this story touched something in you, share it with one person tonight. Someone who might need permission to go back and sit under whatever their grandfather planted. Subscribe to Last Generation Stories for more, and drop a comment. What did someone plant for you? Take in any form that you're still living off of today? Because wisdom like that should not disappear with the person who gave it.